Hello folks, it's me and I'm back with a new video for you, this time about something that I love. Actually, it's related to our last video. Remember, we discussed 3 evidence-based strategies for you to help your students learn more effectively. And you know what? You can use those strategies on yourself because you will learn more effectively as well. But today we're going to talk about what many authors refer to non-cognitive skills. Yes, that's right. Yeah, when we talk about neuroscience, especially cognitive neuroscience and cognitive psychology as well, we normally focus on cognitive stuff, right? That's why it's called cognitive. What is cognition? What does that have to do with learning? It has a lot to do with learning. But isn't there anything that goes beyond cognition that maybe influences learning as well? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about right now. So, let's do it! Okay. So let me go back to the beginning. Remember, one of the videos that I recorded not too long ago was about neuroscience not being the answer for everything. Because neuroscience is not magic, right? Neuroscience can help us understand how the brain works. And of course, it relates to cognitive processes more often than not. After all, we're trying to understand how our cognition can help us learn. The same goes for cognitive psychology, right? But then we have to ask ourselves, what is cognition? According to the American Psychological Association, cognition has to do with attention, memory, language use, awareness, perception, thinking, rationality, reasoning, all of those wonderful things that should be working if we want to learn anything. The thing is, just cognition won't cut it. We need something else. And some authors refer to those things as non-cognitive skills. You may have heard of them. I'm sure you have heard of them, actually. You may have heard of social and emotional learning, right? I'm sure you have. What about emotional intelligence and self-regulation and stuff like that? How about, beliefs and attitudes that influence learning? As a matter of fact, that's the title of an article that I published quite recently. Yes, you can check it out. You can go to Gile Journal of Skills Development and you will see that I published this paper about attitudes and beliefs that influence learning. Now, they are not necessarily or directly connected with cognition, because they don't deal with attention, memory, and all of those other beautiful things I've just told you about. But they deal with how we feel about learning, the things we believe about our own learning capabilities, and how we act based on those things. Whether those actions are conscious or not very conscious. Maybe it's actually just an instinct, right? Oops, just remembered something. You may also have heard of soft skills, right? The thing is, are they soft? Should we call them soft skills? Yeah, let's talk about that later. Okay, now let's go back to attitudes and beliefs that influence learning. Again, this is something that I've been studying for a while. It's actually the product, let's say, of my dissertation. Yeah, my master's dissertation was about building a psychometric scale of mind, brain, and education practices that can help teaching and learning more effectively. Whoa, that's, weird. No, it's not weird, right? It's interesting. So I haven't really published my dissertation yet. Shame on me, I know. But I'm actually breaking my dissertation into many papers, I guess. That's what I'm doing. And I'm using a lot of the insights I got from all of the research to produce new materials and content and ask questions, basically. And, well, one of the things that I investigated was really what impacts learning from a mind-brain education perspective. Remember, mind-brain education has a lot to do with the science of learning, right? They're sister sciences or brother sciences or, I don't know, siblings. Okay, you choose whatever you prefer. So, if there are things that go beyond cognition that affect learning, what are those things? I'm sure you've heard that IQ, that's intelligence quotient, is not the only thing that matters, right? So if IQ is not the only thing that matters, what matters other than IQ? Have you ever heard of EQ? So EQ stands for emotional quotient. And many psychologists agree that if you have very high IQ but you cannot manage your emotions very well, that's not very good for learning. As a matter of fact, you may be aggressive, you might lack empathy, you may not be able to control your emotions very well when something very important happens, which means that, I don't know, maybe you just burst out and start yelling at everyone. So for you to have EQ, you need to have certain beliefs and attitudes that relate to learning more effectively, let's say. According to my research, I was able to basically narrow down all of those soft skills or non-cognitive skills or whatever you want to call them into a group of 4 things, okay? So pay attention. 4 things to make it easier for you to understand. And the first thing is neuroplasticity. Yes, neuroplasticity is actually something that relates a lot to neuroscience. I know that. But neuroplasticity is one of the basic fundamentals of our brains. And it basically says that our brains can make new connections, right? Our brains are plastic because we can always make new connections. As a matter of fact, you are making connections right now. So your brain is different now than it was a couple of seconds ago because maybe you learned something new, huh? How amazing is that? So plasticity declines over time. But if you don't believe you have plasticity, and you know what? A lot of students don't even know that their brains are plastic. They might not believe that they can learn. So it's not really plasticity in itself, but it's the belief that your brain can change, and it does change. Not just, it's not just a metaphor. It's actually, physiologically speaking, your brain is changing right now. Your neurons are making new connections, new neural networks, and this is amazing. I love it. I'm obsessed with that. Sorry. Okay. Now, if you don't tell your students about this property of the brain, they may never learn, and maybe they're just going to believe that they cannot do things well, they cannot learn, and that will impact their learning outcomes. Now, the second thing has to do with the research that was done by Jaeger and Dweck. And I'm sure you've heard of Dweck, Carol Dweck, right? So Carol Dweck published a great book. I have it somewhere here. It's called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. I read it a couple of times. I'm a fan. And okay, but let me tell you something. Not everything people tell you about mindset is real, because I think they exaggerated a little bit. It's like, again, it's not magic. Mindsets. We all have a fixed and a growth mindset persona. So they're sometimes in conflict, right? So sometimes we believe that we do not have the talent or the skills to accomplish something, and that means we're not even going to try, and that's probably why we can't do it, right? But people who have a more growth mindset, they believe that dedication and commitment, effort, they are more valuable than intelligence. So it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, it matters how committed you are. And you know what? There's another author who talks about that, Angela Lee Duckworth. She has a great book about grit. So living life like it's a marathon and not a sprint, right? You should definitely get the book and read it. Awesome. So you can teach your students how to develop a more growth mindset. Of course, sometimes they are going to fall back into their fixed mindset persona because, we're humans and sometimes we're in a bad mood. Sometimes something happened and it's impossible for us to always have a growth mindset about everything. We can't. But we can help nurture the growth mindset persona in our students, and that is going to have a very positive impact on their learning according to research. Yes. So that's number 2, right? So the third one is, hold your horses. I know, I'm sorry. So the third one is the notion of self-efficacy. And guess who talked about that? Great American psychologist Albert Bandura. Yes, self-efficacy has to do with being able to set out and stick to goals so that you can accomplish the tasks or the outcomes that you want. So basically, a person who is self-efficacious has the skills to prioritize, organize, to accomplish, to execute the things that they need so that they can get somewhere. A person who is not self-efficacious cannot do those things very well and might need help. Actually, a self-efficacious person knows when they need help and asks for help so that they can do the things that they need to do. But the thing is, again, it's not an absolute divide, right? It's always a spectrum. Sometimes we are more self-efficacious, sometimes not so much. You can help your students develop self-efficacy. Actually, Bandura talks about 4 sources of self-efficacy. Basically, the first source has to do with making sure your students try first. You know, many times what stops your students from achieving something is that they don't even try. So make sure they take that first step and, whoa, I can do it. So maybe that gives them confidence to keep doing it. The other thing that you can do is observe others doing something and realize that if they can do it, maybe I can do it too. And that boosts your confidence for you to try. You also have to think about your students' emotional state. So sometimes they're not performing well because they're sad or something may have happened to somebody in their family. So you have to be able to identify the emotional states, right? And another source of self-efficacy has to do with verbal persuasion, or actually telling yourself or having someone tell you that you can do it, right? Sometimes we just need a mentor to give us a push, and that helps. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is a very cool thing. It's actually a concept that was developed many years ago, many decades ago. It was coined by another American psychologist, John Flavel, in the mid to late 70s, and it's Metacognition. Metacognition, yes. So I'm sure you've heard of the slogan of Metacognition, right? It's thinking about thinking, or the cognition about cognition. That's what the prefix meta means. But the thing is, I don't like that definition because thinking about thinking doesn't necessarily lead to action. So I prefer the other one, the other slogan. I know you know, it's learning how to learn. So metacognition has to do with thinking about your own cognitive processes so that you can create the best experiences for you to learn, so you can adjust things as you go, so that you can regulate the results and you can try different things in case nothing works, or you can even improve the processes you've been trying, right? Being metacognitive does give you an academic advantage because you believe that you can always improve the processes, you can always analyze the things that you've been doing, and you can do them better. Now, if you're not sure about how to help your students become more metacognitive, the first thing you can do is talk about metacognition. You can learn about the different stages of metacognition according to John Flavel. So he talks about metacognitive experiences and metacognitive knowledge and metacognitive regulation. Sometimes it's knowledge and just regulation, right? So you need to know what makes you work better when you're learning. You need to know what makes your teacher teach better. You can ask them questions. You need to know how people in general learn something. So depending on the different activities that you're trying, there are different strategies that you can try so you can learn better. But you also have to be able to monitor. You have to be able to step back and analyze and compare and contrast and make sure that you make the right adjustments so that your learning outcomes are in fact improved. So we talked about the 4 things that are associated with better learning but are not directly related to cognitive processes, right? By the way, can you remember the 4 things? Huh? I'll give you a couple of seconds for you to try to remember. This is called retrieving. It's about the other video. Ha! Okay? Any luck? If you need more time, pause the video. But we discussed the non-cognitive skills, or the skills related to EQ, emotional quotient, or the skills that have something to do with soft skills, even though we shouldn't maybe call them soft because they are equally important. But those skills are incredibly important, fundamental for learning. It's not just about cognition, right? So we talked about neuroplasticity, yes. We talked about mindsets, growth mindset. We talked about self-efficacy, and we talked about metacognition. So next time you're planning your lesson, don't just think about cognitive overload, too much information, or how can I make my students pay better attention here? How can I engage them? But actually add a couple of minutes every class, hopefully. Okay, every week, how about that? So that you can talk about those attitudes and beliefs that will influence their learning outcomes. Tell them that they can always learn because their brains are plastic. Tell them that they can believe and change their attitudes so that they focus more on effort and commitment rather than intelligence or talent, right? Also, help them organize themselves so they become more self-efficacious. Yes, so they can prioritize things, they can execute things better. And finally, ask them to assess the processes. Ask them to look at the stuff that they're doing, analyze, compare, make adjustments, and improve those things. That will lead to better learning, hopefully, right? Like I said, there's never a formula, but that's what the research tells us. All right, folks, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, leave a comment so I can talk to you. Follow me everywhere. Social media, Instagram, go to my blog. You can check out my book. I will record a video about my book, don't worry. You can also send me an email, whatever you want, but stay in touch, all right? And see ya till the next video. See you when I see you.